in this room, today's webinar, Zoom meeting, we have 98%, 101% in this room. On behalf of AIFTP Western Zone, I am welcoming Mr. Abhay Desai, and now over to Mr. Bhaskar Patel. Please, sir.
Good morning, friends. I, myself, Bhaskar Patel, Chairman of All India Federation of West Zone, welcome our National President, Madam Nikita Ben Badeka, Speaker, CA Abhay Desai, and the other professional brothers from All India Federation of Track Practitioners. At this second webinar on GST, I don't want to waste more time. I now request Mr. Abhay Desai to start his talk.
Good morning, friends. I am grateful to AIFTP, Nikita ma'am, Bhaskar bhai. We have a very finite amount of time, so we'll quickly go through the two topics that I intend to cover. First, we shall be dealing with the recent amendments that have come in response to COVID-19. We'll look at the technical aspects of the notifications, who all can avail the benefit in terms of concessions and waivers. And the second aspect is recent issues related to input tax credit. I intend to touch upon two important issues. One, ITC restriction that will cover it as part of COVID-19 discussion itself, because there has been an amendment in that rule. And I also intend to cover section 16 subsection 4, which deals with the time limitations for availment of input. There are certain fundamental issues that we'll see. First, whether such limitations can be imposed by the under the law. If this condition is valid, then at what stage of the entire process of availing the credit will it come into play? And the last is dealing with reverse charge mechanism payments, that if the payments related to financial year 17-18 or 18-19 are made now, can you avail the input tax credit which are otherwise eligible for the credit? So that will be the sum and substance. So I'll try and cover it up within 30 minutes, allotted time to me, and then we'll leave the last 15 minutes question answer, which many participants, I'm sure, will be having on the topic. Now, before we start the discussion, let me just share one very beautiful that I recently read. So there was somewhere in China a court where suddenly the judge had some appointments. So he could not attend the hearing. So they were suddenly on the lookout of a judge.
Your voice is broken. થોડું કદાચ net connection હશે અથવા થોડું microphone તમે નજીક લેવાશે please.
Sure. Microphone, sure. I would also request, if there is a issue with net, we can just.
We have no option. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Also switch off my video so as to.
Please, sir.
Yeah. As I was saying that in China, there was a judge who was not available, so that authorities, the government, had to look out for some other judge. So they found one Zen monk who was nearby. So they asked him that you become a judge for one day. So he assumed the office in the court, and the first case came up. So there was the appellant who made all the arguments in the context in which he had taken some actions and why he was right. So judge was very impressed. The Zen monk was very impressed by the argument. So he said that, yes, you are right. So the law clerk who was sitting just near to that judge told him that you cannot express your judgment too soon. You have to also hear the other side, and then you have to. The judge said, yes, you are also right. Then the other side made their arguments, and after hearing those arguments, the judge said to that other side that yes, you are also right. So the entire courtroom was confused, and they asked the Zen monk that how everyone can be right. So he said that in the given context in which everyone has taken a position, everyone to me seems to be right. Same analogy also applies to GST because many of us take certain positions, certain advice we give to our clients in the context, in the factual background. So all those advice, all those arguments could be right in that given a single right answer in GST. So that is a caveat also to my discussion that whatever points that I am going to share would be my interpretation of the law. There can be multiple interpretations of the same provision given the context in which that law is to be applied. So keeping that in mind, let us go ahead with my presentation.
Bhai, any difficulty?
I'm just trying to change my slide. Yes, now it is.
Okay.
Okay. I think all of you must be able to see the second slide.
Yes, please.
These are the, yeah, is it visible, the second slide?
Visible.
Yeah, sure. So these are the contents of the first topic that we are going to discuss related to the recent amendments. First, we are going to deal with the due dates related to GSTR1. Then we go to 3B due dates. Then we go to the waivers that have been granted in terms of late fees. We look at the tax payment due dates, the interest and the waivers, concessions in the interest liability. We look at composition suppliers, what are the extensions, waivers that have been granted. Lastly, we look at the input tax credit relaxations and certain relaxations in terms of compliance due dates in various provisions of the law. First and foremost, GSTR1, because that is the statement that we file giving the details of the outward supply. So for the months of March, April, and May, as well as for the March quarterly filers, so GSTR1 for this tax, there has been no extension as such. However, a waiver has been granted in terms of late if GSTR1 for this period, that is for the month of March, April, May, and the March quarter is filed by 30th of June. Hence, if you are able to file GSTR1 by 30th June for this tax period, there should not be late fees, there would be a waiver. However, two aspects are to be noted here. First and foremost, for the month of February, GSTR1, there has been no late fee waiver. As we'll see later, there has been a late fee waiver for GSTR3B for the month of February. GSTR1, there is no waiver. The reasoning seems to be that since the COVID-19 pandemic in India started aggressively post 18th of March, hence since GSTR1 for February was to be filed well before that due date, and accordingly it seems that government is not inclined to give waiver for the month of February as far as GSTR1 is concerned. As far as the other months are concerned, March, April, and May, there would be a waiver provided the same is filed by 30th June. Another important aspect to note here is that if the same is filed beyond 30th June, the view cannot be that there will be no late fees up to 30th June and late fee would only apply for the delay post 30th June. That would be incorrect. The reason is that the waiver, which is conditional waiver, which applies only if the filing is done by 30th June. So let us assume that if the filing is done after 30th June, on 1st July, if you file GSTR1 for the given tax period, the late fee would apply right from the date, the original due date of filing the return. So for example, March, the due date for filing one is 11th April. So if the GSTR1 is not filed for the March by 11th April and also by 30th June, and if it is filed, let us say on 1st July, then the late fee would apply right from 11th April to the date of actual filing of GSTR1, that in our example is 1st July. So please keep this aspect in mind. It is very important that filing has to be done within the revised dates. If it is not done, then for the entire period, not just for the incremental period, the late fee would come into, would be imposed. As far as GSTR3B is concerned, Again, here also there has been no extension in the due dates for the month of February, March and April. However, here, similar to what we saw in GSTR 1, there has been a waiver in terms of late filing of this return. The dates we'll see in the next slide, but here the same logic that we discussed earlier would apply, that PB also for this given time period needs to be filed within the stipulated due dates. If it is not within the revised due dates, it would result into imposition of late fee right from the original due date. For May 2020, the notification 36 of 2000, we'll see now. Now, as far as late fee is concerned, the waiver has been granted, notification 32 of 2020. The position that we have just discussed, that if there is a filing beyond the revised date, the late fee would be imposed for the entire original period, right from the original due date of 20th of the succeeding month till the date of filing. The said view has also been clarified in circular which has been issued recently, circular number 130, in line with the notifications which have been issued. Now, as far as the late fee waiver in respect of 3B is concerned, as you can see on your screen, the taxpayers have been divided into 3 brackets. First, taxpayers who are having an aggregate turnover in excess of 5 crores in the last financial year. So, for the month of February and March, you have to see the turnover for the financial year 2018 and 19. So, if in financial year 2018 and 19, if your turnover was more than 5 crores, for the month of February and March, you need to file your returns for the given months by 24th of June to enjoy the late fee waiver. For the month of April 2020, since we have crossed the financial year, so you have to look at the preceding financial year, that would now be financial 1920 and not 1819, and you have to see if your turnover is more than 5 crores. If it is more than 5 crores, the due date would be 24th June for you to file the return and get the waiver. Second bucket is of those taxpayers who are having turnover between 1.5 crore to 5 crore. There has been a additional time, slightly more time has been given for them to file the 3B. So for February and March, the revised date would be 29th June. For April, it would be 30th June. Assessees who are in the last bucket having turnover of less than 1.5 crore, this, please understand, are those registered persons who are not under the composition scheme. The composition scheme we'll discuss. Those who are not under the composition scheme and having turnover of less than 1.5 crore, due dates have been given, as you can see on your screen. For February, it would be 30th June. March month 3B, it would be 3rd July. And for the April 3B, it would be 6th July. So as again, I would just reiterate that you have to see the preceding financial year turnover. So for February and March, to determine where your particular client will fall and which due date will apply, you have to see the 18-19 turnover. And for the month of April 2020, you have to see the 19-20 turnover. And so as to determine under which bucket your client is falling, and accordingly, you have to determine the due date by which you have to file the 3B to get the waiver. For the month of May, the due dates have been prescribed. Here, there has been only 2 buckets as opposed to the 3 buckets that we saw for the month April, March, April, and May, February, March, and April. Month of May, 3B, the 2 buckets are turnover of more than 5 crores and less than 5 crores. Again, the reference is to the preceding year turnover. So for May 2020, the preceding year would be financial year 1920. So you have to look at 5 crores. And the due date would be 27th June. Less than 5 crores, then it has been subdivided into where the principal place of business of the assessee lies. With the principal place of business is lying in the first bucket of states, where Gujarat, as you can see, is also covered. The due date would be 12th July. And if the principal place is lying in the second bucket, the due date would be 14th July. So this is the due date by which, if you file your GSTR 3B, there would not be any imposition of late fees. As far as tax payment is concerned, As you can see in the GSTR 3B regime, the GSTN has linked the tax payment aspect with the return filing aspect, in a sense that unless you cannot pay the tax, you cannot file 3B. The law is not structured in that manner. If you look at section 37, 38 and 39, principally 39, which deals with return filing provisions, the said section merely links the return filing due date with the tax payment due date. It nowhere prescribes that return can be filed only after making the payment of. Having said that, we also need to understand the tax payment due dates, because what we have discussed till now is either a GSTR1 but a statement of outwards for that and the waiver of late fees. We also saw in respect of GSTR 3B, which is actually a return now under section 39. And in that context, we saw that how to avoid the late fees by. As far as tax payment is concerned, as you can see on your screen, for February, March and April, there has been no concession, no extension in terms of due dates. However, there has been a concession in terms of levy of interest for making the payments for the given months, as we will see in the next slide, that interest waiver and concession would apply. For the month of May, the law, the notification has not specified any due date per se by which you have to make the. Assume that since the due date has been given for GSTR 3B for month of May that we just saw in the last slide, so accordingly the payment due date applying section 39 would also be the due dates for filing the return. For May 2020, the due dates would be the due date for filing the return. So it is in a way an extended due date. As far as February, March and April is concerned, there has been no extension, but there has been a relief given by way of either by imposing no interest or imposing interest as a. See in what circumstances you can avoid the interest or you can get a concession in. Before discussing that aspect, it is very important to understand here also that the concessions and interest would only apply if you can file the 3B within the revised timelines. Not file the 3B within the revised timelines, then the interest would apply as would have been the case in normal circumstances. So continue to apply at the rate of 18% right from the due 20th of the succeeding month of tax and the filing of the return. So you also kindly keep this in mind that mere payment of tax would not safeguard the interest liability or would not grant concession in interest. You have to also ensure that the return also gets filed within the revised timelines. So who all can enjoy the waiver and concession in interest? So here again, as we saw in the 3B waiver of late phase chart, the assessees are here again divided into 3 buckets. Those who are having turnover of more than 5 crores, those who are having turnover between 1.5 to 5 crores, and those who are having turnover of less than 5 crores. Here again, as we saw in 3B, you have to see the preceding year turnover. So as you can see on the screen, the period has been given that this concession is for the periods for making payments for the periods of February, March and April. So in normal circumstances, the due date, if you can make the payment by 15 days from the due date, and if you can file the GSTR 3B within the revised timeline, then there would be no imposition. The case for February, the normal due date is 20th of March. Now the notification provides that if you can make the payment for February by 4th of April, that is 15 days beyond the normal due date, there would not be any interest, provided you also file your GSTR 3B by 24th of June. Similarly, for March, the due date would be now 5th May, and for April, the due date would be 4th of June. Now, what if you pay your taxes beyond the given revised due dates, but you do it within the window of 24th June of filing the 3B? In that circumstances, the law gives you a concession. It has against the normal interest of 18%, you will be liable to pay interest only at the rate of 9% per annum. And the delay for which the interest would be calculated would only be the period beyond the said concessional period of 15 days. So for example, in February, instead of paying the tax on 4th April, you pay, let us say, the tax on 20th April. and you file the return by 24th of June, the interest would apply. The interest would apply for the delay from 4th April till the actual payment and filing of the return. That in our case is 20th April. So for that 16 days period, the interest would apply. Now the interest here would not apply at the regular rate of 18%, but the interest would apply at a concessional rate of 9%. But let us take another scenario where for the same month of February, you could not pay the tax and file the return by 24th of June. You did the payment of tax and the filing of return, let us say on 30th of June. In that circumstances, my dear friends, there will not be any waiver or there will not be any concession in terms of interest. Interest would apply at the regular rate of 18% per annum. Further, the calculation of interest would also be for the purpose of ascertaining the number of days for which the delay has happened. That days would not start from 4th April. The calculation would start right from the 20th of March. That is the regular due date for making the payment for the month of February. So bear this aspect in mind, that by filing the return beyond the revised due date has severe consequences. First, in terms of late fee, second, in terms of interest, and third, both late fee and interest getting imposed on the basis of the normal duration of delay and not based on the concessional extensions in making the payment that has been granted by the law. So please bear this aspect in mind and kindly ensure that the taxes are paid and the returns are filed at least within the outer timelines given of filing of the returns, that is 24th June. Assesses having turnover of more than 5 crores are concerned for the months of February, March and April. Assesses in the turnover in the bucket of 1.5 crore to 5 crore, there again there will be no imposition of interest if you can February and March, if you can pay the tax and file the return by 20th June. And for April, that would be 30th June. For assesses up to 1.5 crore for 3 months, 3 different dates are given. For February, it would be 30th June. These are the due dates for filing 3B. For March, it would be 3rd July, and for April, that would be 6th July. So if you are able to file the returns for this month and pay the tax within these timelines, there would be no interest liability at all. You have to simply pay the tax and file the return. So for example, if an assessee is having a turnover of between 1.5 to 5 crore, February, let us say he is having some liability of 10 lakhs. Even if he pays that liability by 29th June and files the return by 29th June, he would be able to enjoy this concession and there would be no imposition of interest on that delay in making the payment of 10 lakhs. But if you cross this timeline of 29th June, for example, then the interest would apply and that calculation of interest would be at regular rates and that would start right from the original due date till the date of making the payment. That would be a delay of, let us say, in February, it would be calculated from 20th March go up to the actual date of payment that you would do after 29th June. So we bear this aspect in mind that by just making a 1-day delay in paying the tax and filing the return can be very costly, because interest would not be only for the extent of 1 day. The interest and late fees would be for the entire period of delay, and that would be very exorbitant cost. Especially given that in COVID, due to COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of businesses are down, cash flow issues are there. So the interest burden, if by making a 1-day delay, would again become exorbitant, and that would further cause downward spiral to certain businesses. So please bear this aspect in mind and advise the clients in advance to make the provisions accordingly and to arrange their cash flows accordingly to ensure that these timelines are met. As far as composition suppliers are concerned, for the quarter ending 31st March, the date for CMP 08, that is for the purpose of making the payment of composition tax and giving the challan, has been extended to 7th July. So for March quarter, the payment would will have to happen by 7th July without any interest, and you can file CMP 08 by that date. As far as GSTR 4 is concerned, for the financial 1920, that is, this is the return that has to be filed on annual basis for the composition suppliers. It would be 15th July. Now CMP 02, which is an intimation for opting for composition for the current financial year now, that is financial year 2021. So instead of a regular date of 30th April, it gets extended to 30th June. So that intimation for opting for the composition scheme for the current year has to be filed by 30th June. Now, along with CMP 02, you also have to file ITC 03, which is basically the details of the stock that you are having immediately preceding the day on which you are opting for composition. This is requirement which is coming out from section 18 subsection 4 of the CGST Act. The issue is that if you have availed the credits in the past and if you are having that stock and now you intend to opt for composition, then the law provides that to the extent of the stock you need to either reverse the credit, or if you have already utilized the credit, you need to pay that money in cash. So that is the reason why ITC 03 is also to be filed when you opt for composition to declare the opening stock. So that for financial year 2021, since you are going to opt by 30th June, now the date for filing ITC 03 also get extended to 31st July. So after opting for composition, you will have 1 month time to file the stock details which you might be having on the date, immediately on the date of filing the composition. So this will also imply that if there is any ITC reversal that you are supposed to do, if a regular taxpayer is now opting under the composition scheme, then that payment also has to be done now by 31st July, as opposed to the normal timeline that would have happened till 30th April. Now, as far as IT relaxations are concerned, as all the viewers would be aware that there is Rule 36 sub Rule 4, which restricts the availment of credit beyond 10% of the eligible credit, which is reflected in 2A. So earlier when this rule was inserted, the window given was 20%, the tolerance window given was 20%. It was reduced to 10% with effect from 1st January 2020. Now that 10% window that has been given to beyond which the ITC would be restricted for a given tax period, a circular was issued, Circular 123, which says that this restriction calculation has to be done on monthly basis. So for each month, you have to see what is the eligible ITC in 2A. You have to calculate 110% of that eligible ITC. So for example, if 100 is the eligible ITC reflected in 2A, you add 10% to it, so that becomes 110. The rule provides that in that tax period, what you can do is you cannot avail any ITC beyond 110 rupees. So if actual ITC that particular taxpayer wants to avail is, let us say, 120, the rule will restrict the availment only till 110. That excess 10 rupees of ITC which that particular taxpayer could not avail, he can avail it in future, provided that pro rata ITC of the missed invoices also get reflected in 2A. Now, due to COVID-19 and what we have already seen, GSTR1 deadlines have been extended. Now, GSTR1 can be filed without any late fees till 30th June for the months of March, April, and May. As opposed to that, as we saw in GSTR3B, the due date starts from 24th June for various taxpayers. So there can be many circumstances where, for example, on 24th June, if a taxpayer having a turnover of more than 5 crores is supposed to file 3B, now on that date when he sees his GSTR 2A, lot of his genuine credits would not get reflected because the counterparty, the counter suppliers would not have filed GSTR 1 because of the valid waiver that has been given in terms of late fees if they file it by 30th of June. So many persons, many suppliers would be filing their GSTR 1 beyond the 3B due date of 24th June for a large taxpayer. So this would again result into difficulty because if the 24th June 2A is considered, it would not have many transactions which are otherwise eligible for credit. And as a result, by applying 36(4), a lot of working capital would get blocked in terms of credit restriction. Because in this case, if let us say your 50% suppliers could not file GSTR 1 by 24th June, but they would file it by 30th June. But when you go and file your return on 24th June, when you look at 2A, instead of 100 rupees, you might probably find only 50. Since you only find 50, if you apply 36(4), the eligible amount would only be 55. As against that, you want to avail 120, So there will be a huge amount of ITC which could have got restricted if this 36(4) would have remained as it is in terms of circular, which says that it has to be applied on monthly basis. So an amendment has been made in the CGST rule. 36(4) has been amended to the effect that for the months of February, March, April, May, June, July, and August, calculation would be done on a cumulative basis and it would not be done on a monthly basis. And the effect of this particular rule has to be given in the 3B that you file for the month of September 2020. So, an example would clarify this point. So instead of now applying this rule 36(4) on monthly basis, you ignore this 36(4) for the time being when you file 3B for the months of February, March, April, May, June, and July, and August. You continue to avail the credit as per your books of accounts. Now, come September, you download GSTR 2A. You find out what is the eligible amount in that 2A in the month of September 20 related to the transactions of February, March, April, May, June, July, and August. Let us say at that point in time, because by that point, most of the GSTR 1 filings would have also happened. So at that point in time, you will find that most of the transactions for which you avail the ITC would get reflected in 2A. So with that figure, adding 10% to it, then you have to compare it with the credit that you have already availed in the months of February to August. And then if you find that you have availed anything beyond this 10% of permissible limit, only in that circumstances you will have to restrict in terms of reversing the credit that you already availed in the earlier months in the month of September by giving the effect in the 3B that you file for that particular month. So essentially this relaxation is in terms of saying that instead of applying this rule on monthly basis, you apply it on cumulative basis, in effect saying that you continue to avail the ITC as per your books of accounts till September. In September, you find out in 2A as on the date of September, not 2A which is available today for the month of February, March, or April. Let us say you have to look at 2A in September or for all these months from February till August, and in that 2A you determine the eligible amount of ITC, and then you compare that eligible amount of ITC with the ITC that you have already availed in the previous months. And then only if you find that if that amount is beyond 10%, then only this restriction would come in. Having said that, essentially viewers must also consider that this particular rule lacks the necessary ingredients for it to be considered as a valid provision. First and foremost, there is no provision in law as on date to enable the government to prescribe such rule. There is a provision that they have inserted in terms of section 43A, but that provision is yet to be notified. So essentially, the Supreme Courts have time and again in number of decisions have held that unless there is rule making is a delegated legislation. So unless there is an express provision in law which permits the government to formulate such a rule, the rule formulated in violation of any express provision would be an ultra vires rule. It would not be valid. Further, Rule 36(4) also has certain legal impediments in terms of rule not giving you essentially a position to say that this rule has to be applied on monthly basis, because this rule does not take care of quarterly filers. Hence, it is only the circular which went beyond the rule and said that this rule has to be applied on monthly basis. So on that aspect also, this circular 123 is again going much beyond what the rule is stipulating. The rule, in our opinion, has to be only exercised if someone wants to really apply the rule. It has to be only applied once the 2A for that particular financial year is eventually finalized, where the law would not permit further amendments, further modifications to that 2A that ideally would be available only post the September of the next financial year. So only at that point in time, you can essentially apply this rule to find out really if there is any restriction or not. Another aspect also which viewers must consider, that under section 16 as such, there is nowhere a provision which provides that ITC would not be permitted on account of violation of this rule. This would be the rule which goes ahead and says that the ITC would get restricted if it is availed beyond the 10% stipulated. also, probably the courts would take a favorable view as far as the transactions are genuine. This rule purposefully, if you go back to the GST Council minutes of the meeting, you will find that the intent of imposing this rule was to find out those transactions which are fraudulent, which are paper transactions. So I believe that as far as the transactions are genuine, just merely because it is not reflected in 2A and accordingly this credit gets restricted would not be a correct law. And accordingly, our viewers can decide as far as genuine credits are concerned. I am of the opinion that the same should be taken as per your books of accounts, and this this rule may not be seen in a strictest manner so as to restrict the credits. However, practically, what I would find and what we have also observed in a lot of corporate clients that we come across, that as compared to 17-18 when GSTR filing was very weak, GST law was new. Now we find that a lot of stringency has come, a lot of order has come in terms of filing GSTR1, and hence now practically we don't come across a large number of cases where the variation between 2A and the credit that you intend to avail is beyond this time limits of 10%. However, having said that, due to COVID-19 pandemic, cases would happen where a lot of companies would face financial crunches. They would not be able to file one in time. They would not be able to even pay taxes in time. So a lot of interesting issues would come because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure the courts are going to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and the society at large, and then try and read all these provisions which are in a way made to avoid bogus claims and not to avoid genuine claims in such pandemic scenarios. So I believe in that light, read this rule. Now there has been also relaxations in terms of compliances which has to happen in this COVID-19 period. Now, what is this COVID-19 period? The notification says that the period for which the relaxations have been granted starts from 20th March and it runs up to 29th June. So essentially the notification 35 says that whatever compliances that you are supposed to do within this time period under the GST law, either as a taxpayer, and this also equally applies to the department, that whatever department was supposed to do in this time frame of 20th March to 29th June, now that all those time limits get in one stroke extended to 30th June. Now, example could be, for example, completing the proceedings, passing of the orders, furnishing of, let us say, any intimations, filing of appeals, filing of replies to adjudication notices. All those aspects are covered in this notification. However, this notification has expressly excluded certain provisions of law, in a sense saying that these provisions of law would still continue to remain applied during this COVID-19 period that we discussed, is from 20th March to 29th of June. Now, which are those provisions? Let us quickly have a look at it. So first is provisions which are contained in Chapter 4. Now, Chapter 4 of the GST law deals with time and value of supply. So essentially what this notification says, that if, let us say, if someone is making a supply during this COVID-19 period, so for example, today there are certain essential supplies which are continue to remain open, and there are taxpayers who are making those supplies. Maybe once the lockdown is lifted, or maybe in a phased manner the lockdown is lifted, there will be a lot of supplies that the registered persons would be making time and again till 29th of June, which is the COVID-19 period. So what essentially this notification says, that for all the supplies that you make during this period, the time of supply and the value of supply would remain still the actual time and value of supply, which would have been the case if the normal law would have been applied. In a way saying that if you are given the supply now, you are supposed to make the invoice now, and you are supposed to consider this as a liability of the current month and pay that liability in accordance with the revised timeline that we have just discussed in the earlier part of my presentation. So the time and value of supply provisions do not get suspended or do not get extended. If you are making the supplies during this COVID-19 period, the liability on those supplies, if they are taxable supplies, would remain of the current period only. It would not get extended to 30th June. So if you are making a supply in the month of April, the tax on that supply would be the liability for the month of April only. It would not become the liability of the month of June, the 30th June timeline, which has been extended for all other normal provisions. So that is first exception to this general exemption that is given. The second exceptions are a bunch of provisions which have been identified. So for example, first is section 10 dealing with the composition option. Whereas the viewers are aware that under the composition scheme, once you cross a certain threshold limit, for goods, it is 1.5 crore. For services, it is 50 lakhs. So once you cross those limits, you are no longer eligible to avail the benefit of the composition scheme. So this provision is not also does not get extended in a way saying that if, let us say, from 1st April you want to exercise the composition option, you might do the filing of CMP02 maybe on 30th June. But for example, maybe because of increase in the business of certain sectors, it might be possible that you might cross the limit, let us say in April or May itself. Then from the date on which you cross the stipulated limit, turnover limit, you will have to surrender the composition option and you will have to pay tax as per the regular rate. So this provision also does not get extended. Registration provisions also do not get extended. So if someone is required to obtain a registration, if let us say is currently today a non-registered taxable person, but tomorrow because of crossing the threshold or maybe because he gets covered under section 24, which deals with compulsory registration, if he is required to obtain the registration, even during this COVID-19 period, he has to do it within the normal time frame of 30 days, which is given in the law. He cannot seek an extension of taking the registration by taking it on 30th June. So this also kindly bear in mind. As we discussed, provisions related to tax invoice are not suspended. So tax invoice has to be prepared in accordance with the time of supply. Section 37 also in terms of furnishing GSTR1 is not suspended. However, this is with respect, this has to be seen in the context of late fee waiver that we have discussed. Section 47 again with dealing with late fees also is not suspended. Again, this would be subject to the late fee waiver. That is why time and again I said that if you are not able to file the returns within the revised due dates, if you are not able to pay the tax within the revised due dates, the consequences of late fee, consequences of interest, as per the normal provisions would apply, because as you can see 37, 47, 50 have not been suspended. They continue to remain in force during the COVID-19 period. Power to arrest is also not suspended. Section 90, the liability of a partner to pay, including the retiring partner to pay the tax if there is a default of paying the tax by a firm is also not suspended. Maybe the reasoning is that, for example, if the firm may get dissolved by the time COVID-19 pandemic ends, or the COVID-19 period, as we understand here, is up to 29th June. Till that time, if someone dissolves the partnership and if someone, let us say, the partners are not there, since the partnership now stands dissolved, to safeguard that scenario, Section 90 also has not been suspended. Section 122 and 129 dealing with penalties and detention, search and seizure and release of goods during the transit, during the movement also continue to remain in force. So if, let us say, there is a requirement of, as you can also see on the screen later, Section 68 is also mentioned. If there is a requirement of preparing e-way bill, it has to be prepared. It has not been suspended. And if there is a movement without e-way bill, which otherwise requires an e-way bill, then those goods, those conveyances would be liable for detention. It would be liable for seizure, and it would also be liable for penalties depending upon the facts of each particular situation. Section 39, that is the section dealing with return filing, also does not get suspended. And this is again has to be seen in the context of late fee waiver. However, in return filing, what has been suspended is return filing provisions dealing with TDS return, ISD returns, and returns for the non-resident taxable person. So for these three categories of taxable persons, the provisions for filing of the return get suspended, because as you saw earlier, there has been no waiver of late fees for these categories of returns. And this is because of this provision which suspends this provision till 30th June. So for the entire COVID-19 period, that is from 20th March to 29th June, all the returns with respect, which are in respect of TDS, ISD or NRTP, including TCS return, it has to be filed by 30th June, wherever due date is before 30th June. And if the normal due date is after 30th June, that is for the month of June, it has to be filed within the normal due dates. There would be no late fee on delayed filing of this return because of this suspension of these provisions till 30th June. We already discussed. As far as e-way bill is concerned, it will have to be made. There has been no suspension in that, and all the rules dealing with all the provisions that we discussed have also not been suspended. This is logical, because since a section has not been suspended, obviously the rule in connection with that section, for example, in e-way bills in section 68 has not been suspended. Rule 138, 139, 140 dealing with the mechanism of generating e-way bill liability in context of e-way bills, all those extensions of e-way bills, all those provisions which are contained in the rules also continue to remain valid during this COVID-19 period. The last, as far as the e-way bill which have already been generated before 20th March, but the goods are stuck in transit, and now that e-way bill period has expired, notification 35 provides a concession in terms of a deemed extension of validity. So all those e-way bills whose validity was to expire between 20th March to 15th April, there will be a deemed extension of the validity from 15th April to 30th April. In a way saying that wherever the goods are stuck in transit and the e-way bills have expired, they can complete their journey, they can complete the movement till 30th April 2020 without invoking any penal consequences, without invoking any adverse consequences. Because this is a deemed extension of e-way bill, a taxpayer is not even supposed to go on the portal, e-way bill portal, and seek this extension. All the e-way bills which are going to expire within this timeline of 20th March to 15th April would get automatically extended to 30th. Also here, as we discussed earlier, please understand that from 15th April onwards, e-way bill has to be made for all the movement if it is required as per the normal provision. There has been no concession, no waiver in terms of e-way bills. The second topic that I wanted to cover was ITC. One of the topic that I wanted to cover, because now we have very limited time, maybe 10 minutes I would take, and then we will have certain questions. If 16 subsection 4. This provision has a lot of repercussions, because practically we have seen there are a lot of cases where people have not been able to claim the credits of the last financial year. There can be a number of reasons. One of the foremost reason that comes to my mind is a lot of businesses may not have money to pay the tax and file the return for the last financial year, and that is the reason why they are now filing the return and paying the tax. Let us take a case of financial year 18-19. 18-19, a taxpayer is having ITC, but he could not file the return, and hence he could not claim it in his credit ledger within the dates given in section 16 subsection 4, which is the due date of filing return for the month of September of the next financial year. So for 18-19, that would be 20th October, or the date of actual filing of the annual return, whichever is earlier. Obviously 18-19 annual return would be filed much beyond 20th October 2019. So essentially the due date as per 16.4 for availing the credit for financial year 18-19 would be 20th October. So many instances have come where taxpayers have not been able to reflect the ITC by 20th October for 18-19 invoices. Also, they have not been able to file the returns for 18-19 instances, 18-19 financial year, because of some financial issues, because of some portal related issues. And there are also cases where at that point in time in 18-19, maybe that particular taxpayer was under the impression that the ITC is not available. And afterwards, he has now come to a conclusion that ITC otherwise is available and hence wants to avail the credit. It also happened that now when the GST audit is resumed for 18-19, auditor would also come across certain transactions where the taxpayer might have taken a view that the credit is ineligible, but an auditor might have a view that it is eligible. In that circumstances also, it is possible that the taxpayer, considering the auditor's view, might want to avail the credit. There also this time limit becomes very. Having said that, as you can see on the screen, the 16.4 prima facie provides for the outer time limit within which you have to take the credit for the particular invoice. So if invoice is of 18-19, the time limit for taking the would expire on 20th October of 2019. For 17-18, they had given by adding a proviso or one-time exception saying that for 17-18, even you can avail the credit up to March 19, provide as against the normal time limit, which is 20th October 2018, provided the credit in respect of which you want to avail the credit the invoice has been uploaded. The details of the invoices have been uploaded by the concerned suppliers in their GSTR1. That was a one-time exception, only limited to 17-18. That same exception, same extension has not been granted to 18-19 or even. I mean, these circumstances, what should a taxpayer do? Should he avoid? Should he let go the credits? Should he take it as a cost? Or is there a way in taking the credit by reading 16.4 in a slightly different manner? Now let us consider that aspect. So we will be dealing with three fundamental aspects related to this provision. First is whether such time limits can be imposed at all. If these time limits are to be imposed, at what stage of the entire process of availing the credit can the same be applied? And the last is what would happen in a case where you have paid tax under reverse charge for financial year 18-19. Now, let us say there was a GTA invoice which you had missed paying the tax in 18-19 and availing the credit, and now you intend to make the self invoice in the current financial year, maybe 2020-21, and avail the credit in the current financial year. Will it be hit by section 16? No. So these are the three fundamental issues that we are going to look at quickly. So for the first fundamental issue, whether there can be limits on imposing the limits. So in that context, there are several contentions that must be considered. First contention is, when we look at 16.2 and 16.4, we find a very interesting proposition in terms of 16.2, which has four conditions, which says that a taxpayer would be entitled to claim the credit if he satisfies four conditions. Those four conditions are: first, he should have the document, he should have received the goods or services, the tax should have been actually paid on those supplies, and the return should have been filed. When you look at 16.2 and these four conditions which are contained in 16.2, it nowhere gives a due date by which you have to file the return so as to become entitled for credit. It is only 16.4 which gives the time limits. However, 16.2 starts with a notwithstanding clause which says that notwithstanding the entire section 16, the credit, the taxpayer would be entitled to credit if he is complying with those four conditions. So in a way, 16.2 is also overriding 16.4 because it starts with a notwithstanding clause which does not safeguard or which does not save 16.4 because it applies across the entire section 16. So a contention can be made that as far as 16.2 is concerned, since it is overriding 16.4, and as long as I satisfy these four conditions, I should be able to avail the credit. So all the credits which are although pertaining to 18-19, but for those supplies also, since you would have already met four conditions in terms of you would have the invoice, you would have received the goods or services, tax payment condition in a way as on the current mechanism of 3B as such cannot be complied, and the fourth condition of filing the return under section 39, that anyway you would be filing the return under section 39 regularly. So having satisfied these four conditions, a view can be taken that 16.2, which overrides all other provisions of section 16, would apply and the credit would be allowed even if it is beyond the timeline given under 16. Now 16.4, second contention is, if you see 16.4 and if you see why the lawmaker had to first put a timeline in the law for the purpose of availment of the credit. Now when you see 16.4 and when you go to the GST settlement of fund rules, you will find there is a rule 4, sub rule 4, which gives you the intent behind putting this condition in 16.4. The idea was that in GSTR 1, 2, and 3 system, the GSTN would be able to identify the credits which have not been availed till the 20th October of 2000 of the next financial year. So for 18-19, it is 20th October 2019. And once the GSTN would have identified this unavailed credit, that unavailed credit is actually a money which is lying right now with the government, which needs to be apportioned between the central government and the state government. So a rule has been formulated for the apportionment of this money which has been identified in the GSTR 1, 2 and 3 system of having been unavailed. Now, how in 1, 2, 3 system this amount would have been identified? The supplier would have filed their GSTR 1, but the recipient would have filed GSTR 2, but they would not have availed the credit of these invoices, and hence the government would have known the amount of unavailed credit which the recipient do not intend to avail, and accordingly this amount would have been apportioned between the state and the central government in accordance with the settlement of. I mean, when GSTR 2 and 3 gets suspended, first and foremost, there is no mechanism by which this unavailed portion can be known to the government. Second, we have GSTR 2A, where if the credit which you intend to avail, even beyond the stipulated due date, is reflected in 2A, when there is no mechanism for you to intimate to the government that whether you want to avail the credit or not to avail the credit, the logic of formulating 16.4 fails. And government has also recognized that in a way of bringing an amendment to section 17 of the IGST Act by inserting subsection 2A to the effect that since this unavailed amount cannot be known unless 1, 2, 3 system is not operational, an ad hoc distribution of this money, which is temporarily lying in various CGST, IGST and SGST ledgers, would happen between the state and the central government. So our second contention is that the logic for 16.4 itself has failed because of the suspension of 2 and 3, and accordingly it can be held that now 16.4 has to be read down, and the time limit would be the date of actual filing of the annual return and not the filing of the September return. Third is the aspect of supervening impossibility. Now, as we already discussed earlier, the timeline of return filing and the payment of tax has been linked under law, but law nowhere provides that a return can be filed only after making the payment of the tax. So lot of taxable persons who have not been able to file the returns and hence not been able to avail the credit just due to the fact that they are not having funds to pay the tax and hence enable the filing of the return. I am of the view that you can clearly apply the Supreme Court ruling in case of Cochin State Power and Light Corporation, where the Supreme Court has clearly said that law cannot compel a person to do the impossible. Here, the law is compelling me to do the impossible because the GSTN portal is not allowing me to file the return unless I make the payment, which is not in accordance with law. And hence, it is a clear case of supervening impossibility, and accordingly, 16.4 restrictions have to be again read down. Fourth contention is, if you see 16.4, it is applied qua the return under section 39 for the month of September of the next financial year. Now, 3B initially, when it came into picture by way of an amendment in Rule 61, Sub-Rule 5, was not a return under Section 39. It is only in October 2019 that by way of a retrospective amendment, 3B has now been given as a return under Section 39. However, there are two contentions that a person can make. First and foremost, a 3B under sub-rule may be considered as a return under Section 39, but for the purpose of 16.4, 3B would not be a return under Section 39 given the fund settlement mechanism for which 16.4 has been inserted. Second, as far as those 3Bs, as far as the credits which have already vested before the date of this amendment, that is before October 2019, we have two good rulings of Eicher Motors and Daiichi Karkaria of Supreme Court, where it says that if the credit has been duly vested, the said vested credit cannot be taken back. So before this amendment, the credit was already vested because these timelines would not apply because 3B was not a return under Section 39. We have a Gujarat High Court ruling also in case of AAP and company to the same effect that 3B is not a return under Section 39. So it would be suffice to say that the credit which has already been vested before the date of an amendment, where 3B was not a return under Section 39 and hence 16.4 limitation would not apply, that vested credit cannot be taken back by way of a retrospective amendment. So as far as credits which have accrued before the date of this amendment would be a vested credit, and as long as you satisfy conditions of 16.2, I am of the view that it cannot be restricted. You also have this Article 300 capital A of the Constitution, which says that the property of a person cannot be taken away from him except by authority of law. Supreme Court has time and again interpreted this provision in a sense that that authority of law has to be a reasonable authority. Vested credit is a property of the person. Once a vested credit is a property of a person, a law cannot take that vested credit away from him either by way of making a retrospective amendment or by giving a timeline which is otherwise based on a reasoning which is now no longer in force. Lastly, normally department would come and rely on this single decision of Supreme Court in case of Osram Surya to say that these time restrictions are valid. My dear friends, please read this judgment very closely. This judgment is not on the legal validity of this time limitation. This judgment was merely on a narrow issue of whether the amendment made in the moderate rule of a similar amendment of restricting the credit beyond the time period of 6 months before the Supreme Court was merely whether this amendment would apply to the invoices issued before the date of amendment or it would only apply to invoices which are issued after the date of amendment. In that judgment, Supreme Court has categorically stated that since the appellant is not arguing on the validity of this time limit, the Supreme Court is refraining from expressing an opinion on whether such imposition of such time limit is valid or not. So the department may apply this judgment because this is the only judgment of the higher court which is on this issue. But this judgment has not tested the aspect of validity, and hence, in my opinion, this judgment would not come into play as far as 16.4 interpretation is concerned. Second issue is the stage of application of this time limit. So many cases we have come across where the person might have taken the credit in their books of accounts, but they would not have reflected the credit in 3B and filed the 3B. So for example, in 1819, because of technical glitch, because of not able to file 3B, the person would not have been able to reflect this credit in 3B and get it amount credited in the electronic credit ledger. But the said credit would be the part of his books of account that he is maintaining regularly under the law. I mean, in that context, we have to see whether this time limit applies to the date of availment of credit in the books of accounts, or will it apply qua the date of reflection of this credit in the electronic credit ledger. Now, please understand, friends, that 16.4 time limit applies to the date of taking the credit. The law is very clear. You can go back to 16.4. It says, no person shall be entitled to take. So the time limit of 16.4 applies on the date of taking the credit. We have to see what is the date on which credit is taken. If you go to 16.1, two fundamental aspects will come up for you. First is the right to avail the credit, and the availment of the credit and the credit of that amount in the electronic credit ledger are separate events. 16.1 categorically says that you can avail the tax credit and the amount that you have availed will get reflected in the electronic credit ledger. So the reflection in the electronic credit ledger is not the stage of availment of the credit. It is a stage post the availment of the credit to merely reflect that money in the credit ledger for the purpose of utilization of that credit for making the payment of tax under section 49 subsection 4 or for the purpose of seeking refund under section 54. The said proposition also gets support from Rule 36 sub Rule 2, which says that you can avail the credit as long as you have the necessary documents and you have filed GSTR 2. Now 2 has been suspended. So the only requirement under Rule 36 sub Rule 2 for a taxpayer to avail the credit is that he should have the necessary document. The same proposition we can also see in section 35 subsection 1D, which asks a taxpayer to maintain the register of availment of credit. So this clearly brings out the fact that the availment of credit has to happen in the registers maintained by the taxpayer, and in 3B it is merely a reflection of that already availed credit. We have 16.2, which again deals with the entitlement of credit. It does not deal with the stage of availment of the credit. So it would clearly support the proposition that as long as I submit and I fulfill the conditions of 16.2, I have availed the credit in my books of accounts. That would be the stage on which 16.4 restriction would come into play. Now, what was the need of the legislator to create this two event of availment of the credit and the reflection of that credit in the electronic credit ledger? This brings us to this interesting provision, section 41, 42, and 43, which says that the credit would get provisionally credited under section 41 to the credit ledger. It would undergo matching under section 42 and 43 if 2 and 3 would have not been suspended. And then that amount would have become the final credit which is available for utilization or refund. Now, having said that, this clearly brings out the fact that the stage of availment of the credit and the transfer of this credit into the credit ledger for the purpose of matching and for the purpose of enabling the utilization or refund are clearly separate stages. 16.4 applies qua the stage of taking the credit. It does not apply qua the stage of reflection of that credit in 3B. So I am of the view that as long as you have taken the credit in the registers that you are maintaining in your books of accounts within the time frame given, clearly an argument can be made that even if 16.4 is a valid proposition, still, since you have availed the credit in your books of accounts and that credit stands reflected, merely reflection of that credit in 3B by way of delayed filing or by taking it into 3B of a subsequent month would not make it disentangled. We have Supreme Court decisions, Gujarat High Court decision to support the view that availment of credit in the records and the reversal of that credit in the records tantamount to non-availment. So essentially saying that if there is an availment in the records but no reversal in the records would tantamount to availment. So this proposition has already been expressed by the Honorable Supreme Court in 2 judgments as well as Gujarat High Court. Last, we have a very good decision of Chennai Tribunal in case of Ford India, where they have differentiated the judgment of Osram Surya by saying that Osram Surya judgment never dealt with the stage on which you have availed the credit. It merely dealt with the time frame and whether the invoice issued before the date of amendment would get covered or not. So that judgment clearly held that as long as the person has availed the credit in RG 23 Part A, that was in, the record that a taxpayer was supposed to maintain in the excise regime, the reflection of that credit post the date of that availment would not be the determining factor as far as the time limits are concerned. It is the date on which you take it in that register, that date has to be seen to determine the time limit. So we have enough proposition to say that I have to look at the availment in my records as long as I avail it within the time frame. A mere reflection of that credit with a delay should not make it a disentitled or ineligible credit. The last issue to discuss is RCM. For example, 1819, there is a GTA invoice. The taxpayer did not prepare a self-invoice in 1819, did not pay the tax in 1819. And now during the GST audit, it has been identified and now the auditor is asking that particular taxpayer to make a self-invoice and avail the credit. Is this proposition correct? In my opinion, this proposition is completely correct. The reason is this. As we saw section 16.4, the entire purpose of formulating 16.4 was to determine the unavailed ITC, applying GSTR 1, 2 and 3 system, and to apportion the funds of that unavailed ITC between the state government and the central government. Where in context of reverse charge, as viewers understand, the credit is available on the self-invoice that particular registered recipient prepares. So it is the date on which you prepare the self-invoice which results into the claim of ITC, not even the date of payment or the date of receipt of goods or services which are liable for payment of tax and the reverse charge. So I would submit that it is not a case where the money is lying in the government and government wanted to apportion that money and hence the time limit was imposed. It is not a case because in RCM the payment would happen only post the date of preparation of the self-invoice. So if the self-invoice is prepared now for the financial year 18-19 supplies, and I am of the view that it is a self-invoice of the current financial year 2020-21. Payment is also happening today in this financial year. So time limit of 18-19 would not apply to such credits. So this aspect can also be seen in the language used in section 16 subsection 4. Now if we closely see section 16 subsection 4, it says it applies to the invoices which are made for the supply of goods or services. When you make a self-invoice for discharging liability under reverse charge, that invoice is prepared under section 31 subsection 3 clause F. If you closely read that clause, it is it says that the invoice is not for supply, but the invoice is prepared by the recipient for the receipt of goods or services which are liable for tax charge. So there is a difference. There is an invoice for supply which is made by the supplier to which 16.4 applies, and there is a self-invoice prepared by the recipient for receipt of goods, not for supply of goods by the supplier, and hence I am of the view that 16.4 only applies for the invoices which are for supply made by the suppliers. it would not apply to a self-invoice prepaid under reverse charge mechanism, because it is not an invoice for supply of goods or services. It is an invoice for the receipt of goods and services which are liable for tax under reverse. With that, I conclude. I think I have exceeded my time, but within the limited time frame, the idea was to share with all the viewers the important amendments, the implications of the amendments, and to take you through one or two critical aspects related to input tax credits. I think with that, we can now open up the floor for question answers. I think Nigamba is requested to kindly take it forward.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Abhay bhai. Now I am requesting to Mr. Bhaskar bhai to conduct this further action. Bhaskar bhai, you are on mute. Just unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Friends, if any questions from your side, you are most welcome to raise the question so that our speaker can reply.
Okay, here I am requesting all person, any question who wants to raise can put in message window. Now Galaxy J7 wants to raise one question.
Yes.
Please, I'm only. Please, I don't know.
Hello.
Yeah, please.
About
Question.
Not an issue. Abhay bhai, there is one question in chat box.
Okay.
If ITC as per GSTR 2A is more as compared to ITC claim, then in GSTR annual return, we have to mention the difference as non-available of input tax credit? Question.
I understand. So the query is that in 2A you have 100 rupees, but you have claimed only 80 rupees.
Yeah.
That person is worried as to how he will reflect that in his annual return. I'm sure it is rarest of rare case that you actually come across such facts. Not reverse. It is 80 and person wants to avail 100. However, having said that, see the purpose of that table 8 in annual return, where the table 6 difference between an arithmetic difference between what is in 2A and what is the claimed ITC, and the difference the table wants you to park into two separate heads. One is what is eligible and not availed, and what is ineligible. Now, friends, please understand that the table is insufficient in terms of, I'll give you a simple example to drive home the point. Let us say you have availed credit of 80. There is a credit of 10 out of 80 which is not in 2A. And in 2A, 100 is reflected, but that 100 contains, let us say 30, which is ineligible. So the net difference is what you get is 20. But actually what is ineligible is 30, and what is eligible and not available is not reflected is 10. And that is why it is resulting into a net difference of 20. Now in table 8, there is no mechanism for you to give such an explanation where you can say that 30 is ineligible and 10 is eligible and available but not reflected in 2A. And hence the net difference when you do an arithmetic working is coming to 20. And that is the reason why, friends, you will find that in 1819, they have come out with a press release saying that in table 8, someone wants to give a detailed breakup. He can go ahead and make it in a separate file and attach a PDF along with the annual return. So the reasoning is that if someone wants to do a detailed exercise, really express the reason for each and every difference, he can go ahead and do it. In my mind, it is not required. We discussed 2A is not the document on the basis of which you can really make your claim for credit. You have to see the provisions of law. So maybe practically what we have also done is we have parked the difference, whatever difference that arithmetically we find in table 8 as credit which is eligible but not availed, because that is the only way in which you can file the annual return. Annual return does not allow the taxpayer to leave that difference and not explain it in these two columns. And that is the reason why practically we are doing it. But again, we are putting a note in 9C wherever we file it, saying that this is only for the purpose of the, because of the structure of annual return, we are compelled to do it. But that cannot be taken as our stand, as a valid stand in terms of that credit being ineligible.
Thank you, Abhay bhai. Now another participant name with Nokia 6.1 plus. I have unmute him. You can ask question to Abhay bhai.
जनकભાઈ
जनक bhai
વાઘાણી 6.1 નોકિયા.
Mr. Janak bhai, I am requesting you to ask some question because you have raised head. Not an issue. Mr. Kevu Shah. Mr. Kevu Shah.
हाँ जी सर.
You can ask question to Abhay bhai.
અભય ભાઈ,
जी.
અમારે માઇનિંગ બિઝનેસમાં રોયલ્ટી ઉપર આરસીએમ જે ભરવાનું હોય છે,
હાજી.
18-19 માં અમે 5% લેખે ભરેલો છે. હવે
હાજી.
ઘણા બધા એઆર આવતા હવે એવો ખ્યાલ આવે છે કે 18% ભરવાનો થશે, તો ડિફરન્સ નો 13% હવે હું અત્યારે ભરાવી શકું?
Rights ma per se whether it is a tax or is it a value for a supply right now under consideration by the Supreme Court by constituting a 9-member bench. Okay, whether mining rights is the amount that you pay, the royalty that you pay for getting those mining rights, whether that royalty is a tax or not. The reason is in service tax law, this issue is already there alive. If it is if it is of the nature of tax, then it cannot be part of the consideration and it would be outside the levy of tax. If it is not a tax, but if it is a consideration for a service given by the government to that particular taxpayer, then it would get covered under reverse charge, because unless there is an express exemption, all services from the government to a registered taxable person are chargeable. So first issue is whether it is a tax or it is a consideration against a supply of a service. So that, in my opinion, is right now pending, but before the latter bench of Supreme Court. But if you go through the of the Supreme Court, which expressed the doubt, prima facie they are of the view, it seems from the reading of the judgment, nothing but in the nature of tax only, and it should not be liable. Having said that, if the credit is available, it is always advisable to pay it and avail the credit rather than taking on the risk of going into litigation by not paying, because the reason is that tomorrow if the Supreme Court does not go with the earlier decision, they reverse the earlier decision, then there can have drastic consequences, because if the tax is recovered under 74, as you all understand, under ITC we have a provision which says that if the tax is paid under section 74, the credit of that tax would not be eligible. So if tomorrow if you don't pay the tax and if ultimately it is found that it was payable, then it can have a drastic consequences. That is first. Second is, as far as the rate is concerned, I believe you have paid tax 5% by considering it as a transfer of right to use the goods. And since the goods are leviable to tax, as I understand, at 5%, you have paid tax at 5%. But now you find that royalty is a separate service by itself. So it would go and taxed under the residual category, and the applicable tax rate would be the general tax rate of 18% and not the tax rate which is applicable for the goods in respect of which you have been granted the permission to carry out the mining. So probably this is the issue. Now, as you rightly said, there are conflicting rulings. We have a ruling, I believe, of Haryana, which says that the rate which is applicable to goods would apply to royalty also. There is another ruling which says to the effect that no, it is an independent service by itself, so it would be taxed residual category and tax rate would be 18%. If you want to go ahead and pay the difference of 13%, since this is under reverse charge, and as we discussed, bar of 16(4) should not apply here, because this is not a case where you had generated a self invoice earlier of 18% and now you want to avail the credit. Originally, since you had generated a self invoice at the rate of 5%, now you can generate the self invoice of the differential value and you can pay now and you can avail the credit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Abhay bhai. Now, next, Mr. Faizan, I am unmute. You can raise question to Abhay bhai, please.
Sir, so the wordings of section 16 subsection 2 are that no registered person shall be entitled to take the credit unless the following 4 conditions. So how should it be interpreted? That the conditions need to be fulfilled for availing the ITC, or the ITC can be availed once the conditions are fulfilled?
Right. Now see here, I would submit it first and foremost. If you look at 16.1 and 16.2, there is a difference. 16.1 talks about claiming the credit. 16.2 only talks about entitlement of credit. 16.4 talks about entitlement to take the credit. Now the word take is expressly missing in 16.2. 16.2 carefully. 16.2 does not use the word take. It clearly says your entitlement to credit will depend on these 4 conditions. Now those 4 conditions, see there are 4 conditions. First deals with document. Second deals with physical receipt of goods or services. Third deals with actual payment of tax. Fourth deals with the filing of the return. Now, whenever a law gives a condition, there is a Supreme Court ruling in case of BCSR, where the Supreme Court has said that if the law gives a condition, not necessary that the conditions have to be always fulfilled before availing the benefit under that notification or under that legal provision. Conditions are always conditional in a sense that if you have availed the benefit, you have taken the benefit, then you are supposed to comply. The said ruling will squarely apply here. The reason is that if, let us say, if we say that all the 4 conditions have to be met before taking the credit, then it would result into an absurdity, because let us say on 18th you are filing 3B, but the suppliers would file their 3B and make the payment of tax on 20th. So by that logic, none of the registered recipient would be able to avail the credit before 20th, because we will have to wait till 20th for all the suppliers to pay the tax, file the returns, and then only he becomes entitled for credit. So that would be an absurd interpretation. That interpretation would not be legally sustainable. So in my opinion, as far as 16.2 is concerned, it only talks about entitlement, not the stage at which it has to be applied. So first 2 conditions, document and receipt of goods and services, has to be necessarily complied before taking the credit. But the balance 2 conditions regarding payment and filing of the return can be complied even post the date of taking the credit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, Miss Priyanka wants to ask some question. Wait a minute, sir. Hello, Miss Priyanka.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please ask question to Abebe.
Sir, actually, I want to ask if a company has various segments, like various units, and then how to calculate that ratio of 10%? Like हमें 10% जो है as per segment wise लेना है या as a company as a whole, जो rule 36(4) में mention है?
नहीं, so 36(4) जो रूल में मेंशन है वो रूल अप्लाई होता है रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन पे. आपको यदि एक ही GSTN है आपका वो स्टेट में, तो वो GSTN वाइज अप्लाई होगा.
GSTN वाइज, ओके.
आपके 5 डिविजन्स हो, और आपको 5 का जब आप 3B फाइल करते हैं तो 5 का आप एक साथ इकट्ठा क्रेडिट लेंगे. हुए में भी 5 का क्रेडिट इकट्ठा दिखेगा. तो यदि 36(4) अप्लाई करना है तो आपको GSTN लेवल पे अप्लाई करना पड़ेगा, डिवीजन लेवल पे नहीं.
Okay, okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Now, one another question.
Thank you,
Thank you, ma'am. Now I have another question. In Trans 1, credit was taken in 1718, but this credit is appearing in 1819 annual return, which is drafted by GSTN portal. Whether I can delete the amount or it must be continued as per the pertains to 1819, which is declared by auto-populated return.
Right. So what I assume, what has happened, that this person would have filed his Tran 1 after 1718.
Yes.
Was probably because of some technical, he would not have been able to file it, and maybe after it is resolved either through a court ruling or maybe on GSTN application to the nodal officer, through a nodal officer, you could have resolved the issue and you could have been able to file the Tran 1 in next financial year. Say that, please understand that all the auto-populated figures are not, those are merely suggestive figures for you to consider. You have to reflect what is the reality. Now, when we look at the annual return of 1718, 1718 says you have to reflect here the credit of Tran 1 that you have availed, irrespective of the date at which you would have filed the Tran. So I believe that if you have already reflected that credit in 17-18, you cannot again reflect the same credit in 18-19 as well. So better you let them reflect it in 17. If you are under the impression that in 17-18 you should only reflect the credit which is of 17-18, probably you should still consider, although it would not be right because this term credit, in my opinion, actually been there in 17-18 annual return only. Even if the Tran 1 was filed late, provided it is filed before filing the 17-18 return, but if you have not shown it in 17-18, better you show it in 18-19.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Another one question. This question is pertains to cancellation of registration of service provider. In case of service provider wants to cancel registration and his ITC in its books of account is there, whether this ITC is to be paid and when he must cancel registration. Because service industry, there is no any closing stock. Please, sir.
Yeah, right. So if you look at section 18, only if you are having a stock on which you avail the ITC, the date of closure, the stock is lying with you, then only there is a legal requirement to furnish the details of that stock and to reverse the credit which is in proportion to that stock. When you are saying that it is a service industry and you are not having any stock, you would have probably taken this ITC in respect of services, would have availed earlier, or maybe in respect of goods also, but that goods could have been supplied and now they are no longer in stock. I am of the view that there is no need to reverse any credit. However, here the interesting challenge would be to take credit, because there is legally no provision in law which permits you to claim the refund of the credit which is there in your balance when you cancel your number. Court ruling was there in case of Solvay Industries, which was of the Karnataka High Court, where departmental SLP against that ruling before the dismissed, which took a view in the excise regime that Senved balance which is lying on the closure of the factory should be refunded to the taxpayer, because High Court took the ruling that there is no express provision in law which disentitles a person from claiming the refund, and relying on the Daiichi Karkaria and the Eicher Motor judgment that credit once taken is a vested right which is as good as an advance tax paid, and if on the date of cancellation you don't have now any other liability to pay, it should be refunded in cash. However, in case of Solvay Chemical, although the High Court allowed the refund, Bombay High Court has taken an adverse view. Bombay High Court has taken a view that refund will be granted only if it is expressly provided under the law. And since in such scenario the law is not provided for the refund provision, it will not be granted. Ahmedabad Tribunal System is also following the Bombay High Court ruling of late and is not allowing the refund of the credit balances which are there at the time of cancellation. However, this issue is alive. So my only request would be that along with cancellation application, file the refund application also. If the amount is substantial, please keep your claim alive, because the law is going to develop on this front in times to come. And there is a chance that if a positive ruling comes up, you can take this ultimate money back.
Thank you, sir. Now, another question I have received. A partnership firm constructing 24 residential flats come into exercise, existing with effect from 1st April 2019. It has no acceptance advance booking amount from any of the customer. Out of this total inward supply, 65% are from registered person and 35% are from unregistered. Now my question is, does it require to get registered under GST? Another question is, does the firm has to pay RCM on the outward supply or not? Please, sir.
It's a very interesting issue. See, we have to first fundamentally understand that from 1st April 2019, and I'm sure that is the reason why this date has been chosen by the querist, there has been a huge shift in the way real estate sector is taxed. Now the taxation of real estate sector is based on the RERA concept, the RERA law. There is a concept called real estate project which has been defined. The definition under the RERA of the project includes even the construction of those projects which are ultimately meant for sale, not necessary that the sale always happens before the receipt of the completion certificate. So if the project which is under consideration by the querist is registered under RERA, because under RERA, if it is a real estate project, it would also have implications under GST, because once it becomes a real estate project under RERA, qua the GST notification, it would also then be subject to the 80% test as far as the inward supplies are concerned. And if there is a short in 80%, it would trigger the GST liability. And once that liability is triggered, Section 24 gets triggered and registration requirement becomes compulsory, irrespective of his outward supply not maybe crossing the threshold, or entirely it is exempt, because as I understand, he intends to sell all the flats only post the completion certificate. So you have to look at RERA. If RERA is a real estate project, then it would have GST liability.
Thank you, sir. Now, once again, Ms. Priyanka has another query. Ms. Priyanka, please, you can continue.
Sir, actually, at the time filing annual return for financial 17-18, I have paid RCM. Whether that RCM
Can you just repeat? Your voice is not
can be.
Priyanka, again repeat, please.
Sir, at the time of filing and hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
Hello.
Sir, at the time of filing return. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, at the time of filing annual return for financial year 17-18, I have paid RCM, reverse charge, through DRC 03.
Okay.
Whether that credit can be claimed in financial year 19-20?
As far as RCM is concerned, as we discussed in my presentation also, the credit is available on the self-invoice in majority of the cases, because in majority of the cases which are under RCM, the suppliers are not registered. So when suppliers are not registered,
Yes.
you are required to make a self-invoice, and that becomes the valid document for you to claim the credit. So the payment date is immaterial for taking the credit under RCM. What you have to see is the date when you have made the self-invoice. If self-invoice is made, let us say in 17-18, then as I discussed, the limitations of 16.4 does not apply to RCM. And if at all, even if you want to apply it, since it is a 17-18 self-invoice, limit by 20th October 2018, as far as this transaction is concerned.
Thank you, sir. Now, dear
Okay.
friends, I have a
Sir,
please continue.
is there any sir, is
Jump
there
by.
any chance to claim? Actually, sir, वो तो जो DRC 0. Hello. सर जो DRC 03 से पेमेंट किया मैंने एट द टाइम ऑफ एनुअल रिटर्न, इसका मतलब वो पूरा लॉस हो जाएगा ना? बिकॉज विद इन ड्यू डेट
आपने भले DRC 03 से पेमेंट किया, बट आपने सेल्फ इनवॉइस कब बनाया?
सेल्फ इनवॉइस 17-18 में बनाया, बट एक क्लॉज वो भी है ना, RCM का पेमेंट एट द टाइम ऑफ पेमेंट हम लोग क्लेम कर सकते हैं, तो क्या 19-20 में 3B में शो करके उसे क्लेम कर सकती हूँ क्या?
RCM में ऐसा है, आप टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई प्रोविजन आप देखेंगे सेक्शन 12 और सेक्शन 13 में, RCM की प्रोविजन आपको इनवॉइस बनाने का रिक्वायरमेंट सेक्शन 31(3) एक्ट में कब ट्रिगर होता है? जब आप RCM लायबल सर्विसेज लेते हो या गुड्स लेते हो। पे करने का रिक्वायरमेंट कब ट्रिगर होता है? यदि इनवॉइस के 60 डेज के पहले आपने पे कर दिया फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ इनवॉइस, तो जब आप पे कर रहे हो वो मंथ में आपका पेमेंट करने का लायबिलिटी ट्रिगर होगा, या 61st डे फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ इनवॉइस। फंडामेंटली दो अलग चीजें हैं, सेल्फ इनवॉइस बनाना और ITC लेना एक चीज है, और वो इनवॉइस सेल्फ इनवॉइस जो आपने बनाया उसका पेमेंट करना, भले आप 3B में उसको रिफ्लेक्ट करके करते हो या DRC 03 से पे करते हो, वो अलग चीज। जो ITC का एंगल है इसमें, वो है क्वा द डेट ऑफ सेल्फ इनवॉइस, इट हैज नथिंग टू डू विद व्हेन यू मेक द पेमेंट। इसीलिए हम कहते हैं कि ये मंथ का RCM का क्रेडिट आप इसी मंथ ले सकते हो, भले इसका पेमेंट आप 20 तारीख को करोगे अगले मंथ।
ओके।
यदि 17-18 में सेल्फ इनवॉइस बनाया है, क्रेडिट लेने का एंटाइटलमेंट 17-18 में खड़ा हो गया।
Okay.
17-18 में लिया नहीं, 18-19 में भी आई सपोज लिया नहीं, और अब आप 19-20 में लेने के सोच रहे हो.
Yes.
अब एक तो कि आपने जब पे किया, सेल्फ इन्वेस्ट बनाया, तो ये 2 साल का क्यों डिले हुआ क्रेडिट लेने के?
एक्चुअली जो आरसीएम था वो जो डीलर है उसे मालूम नहीं था कि आरसीएम इस पे करना है. एक 5,000 अनरजिस्टर्ड का जो केस था, तो कुछ एक्सपेंसेस पे डीलर ने पे नहीं किया हुआ था, जो कि एट द टाइम ऑफ ऑडिट वेरीफाई किया गया, और इसलिए DRC 03 से वो पेमेंट हुआ.
नहीं तो वो कब आपका 17-18 का ऑडिट तो अभी लास्ट ईयर ही हुआ होगा ना?
यस, एक्चुअली फैब में, जनवरी में हुआ, जनवरी 19.
तो सेल्फ इनवॉइस भी फिर जनवरी 19 में बनाया होगा ना, 17-18 में नहीं बनाया होगा? फिर
नहीं बनाया है.
हाँ, तो जब सेल्फ इनवॉइस आपने यदि जनवरी 2020 में बनाया, तो आप
Yes.
क्रेडिट 19-20 में ले सकते हो, कोई इशू नहीं.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Now,
Means I can claim credit up to
आपका यदि सेल्फ इनवॉइस
Okay.
ये
Thank you, sir.
फाइनेंशियल 19-20 का यदि आपका सेल्फ इनवॉइस है,
Yes.
तो यू कैन टेक क्रेडिट इजीली टिल सितंबर, देयर इज नो इशू.
thank you, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
Now, next question is from Bhavya Popat, Una.
Yeah, Abhay, my question is regarding 29.5 closing stock for cancellation, for registration cancellation. Sir, for a dealer who has not obtained any credit for his stock because it is a VAT stock or even a sales tax stock, so
Right.
would it be liable to pay tax under section 29.5? And what would be the situation for capital asset lying at the date of cancellation?
I agree. Now, this is a right now vexed issue, but we are taking a position that 29.5 in the context has to be read. So it would only apply to those stock on which you avail the credit. It would not apply to those stock which is of the pre-GST era.
Okay, sir. So, how can we read? Because there in the section 29.5 there is a clear demarcation of all the registered dealers, including composition.
But when you look at Schedule 1, there is a Schedule 1 which deems certain transactions as supply. In that schedule, there is an entry which says that if there is a stock on which you avail the credit, if you are now permanently transferring it or disposing it off, then that would be considered as a deemed supply. So the intent of tax legislator is to only impose tax on those stock on which you avail the credits. So you have not availed the credits, and a levy provision cannot be contained under section 29.5. A levy under the law comes from section 9 subsection 1. So
Yes.
if there is a supply, there cannot be no tax. There cannot be any tax.
Thank you, sir.
Cancellation does not tantamount to a supply transaction.
Thank you, sir.
Registration is not a supply. So since it is not a supply, there cannot be any GST by considering that as a supply. There can only be GST to the extent of ITC if any person has availed in the past. So that is why we are reading 29.5 in the context of only limited to the ITC paid stock and not in the context of the entire stock.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abhay. Now, last question is raised from Mr. Manoj Nahta. Question is that landlord is collecting rent of premises with electricity charges based on actual consumption and water charges based on supply through pipeline. Separate charges are mentioned in the bill also. It is a composite supply attracting GST 18% as applicable of rent, or separate charge rate of tax would be applied. Please, sir.
No, so here there are two concepts that we have to understand first. When we look at the value of supply, no doubt it is a composite supply, and when we look at section 15 of section 1, it says the tax shall be payable on the transaction value, that is the price paid or paid. So these charges essentially are the charges of the landlord. These are not the charges of the tenant. So landlord is incurring these expenses and it is recovering that expense under a separate head by reflecting this as different from the normal rent that he would be charging for this particular use or allowing the use of this particular property. So I am of the view that section 15(1), all the amount that is payable would include this amount also. So GST would be levied on the entire amount of consideration. Mere breakup of that into water supply, electricity would not make these charges come out of the ambit of the charging provision. But the scenario could be different in certain other factual circumstances where the levy of that charge is on the tenant. So if the levy is on the tenant and if the landlord pays it and recovers it, then it would get excluded. But in this scenario where you are expressly talking about electricity and water, which remains the liability of the landlord, recovery of that even separately from the tenant would not bring that out of the ambit of GST.
Thank you, sir. So right now, all questions which is raised in this chat box. Now over to Bhaskar bhai.
Yes, thank you very much, Speaker, Mr. Abhay Desai. You have given very good lecture and all the participants may have gained out of that particular lecture. Now, from the desk of AIFTP West Zone, I announce to give memento to Mr. Abhay Desai, which will be given or presented in due course of time in next meeting. Thanks. Thank all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much, Abhay bhai. We have get a valuable.
It is my pleasure always for AIFTP. It is my honor and pleasure.
Please, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, with your
technology will also evolve where memento can be given through web call.
With your kind permission, can I end this meeting, sir? Bhaskar bhai?
Yes. No problem. And now, proposed vote of thanks by Kuntal.
Yes, sir. Mr. Kuntal bhai?
I am here. I was mute. Bhaskar bhai, Bhaskar sir, you have already proposed the vote of thanks and presented memento also, sir. Once again, I express my thanks to Abhay bhai and all the members for participating. Thank you once again on behalf of the AIFTP and AIFTP West. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Abhay bhai, once again, thank you very much.